Hello and Assalamu alaikum. My name is Tariq Ahmed. The Arabs used to have a prayer before Islam even. Oh Allah, protect us from every Tariq, except the one who brings good. And so as I ask Allah to make me a Tariq who brings good through this podcast, this is episode 5 now of my podcast series, The Democratic Way, which you can subscribe to at Substack. Um, the Substack is taraqa.substack.com, taraqa.substack.com. Or you can also follow this podcast series at YouTube at the channel Freed by Islam, where I'm also posting this content simultaneously. What this series is trying to do is bring good, as I said, in response to the prayer. And to me, that means that everything I do has to be done in a way of kindness. The Prophet of Allah taught us kindness is not to be found in anything, but that it adds to its beauty, and it is not withdrawn from anything, but it makes it defective. And we're talking about politics. We're talking about U.S. politics. Politics has become so bereft of kindness. I would say that our political discourse has become defective, especially to the extent that it is unkind. Sure, people may win elections by being unkind. They may speak to each other unkindly, but the amount of violence that we find in our political discourse, it's no longer words that are violent. Actions have become violent. We really need to step away from that. So I hope you will be pleased that my goal through this podcast series is to be kind. And to the subject matter, to you, my audience, to the people whose names I take, the candidates from the various political parties, even the parties themselves, I want to be kind. So with that in mind, we left episode 4 talking about a very dramatic decision that the Democratic Party made. First in 1968, this was the choice in 1968 at the convention, and we talked about why 1968 was a traumatic year. The assassination of King, the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, which left 2 choices for the convention. A candidate who had not gone through any primaries at all, Hubert Humphrey, who was the choice of party leadership, versus Eugene McCarthy, who had contested Bobby Kennedy in the primaries. There was so much tumult, so much discord. The Democratic Party did something very good. The Democratic Party made primaries ascendant. They essentially required candidates to contest the primaries in order to get the nomination. And they made primaries, if you will, the primary way of becoming the candidate. So now the election process for the Democratic nominee is very democratic, right? I mean, from the democracy point of view, because you're on a ballot, you have to convince voters to vote for you, to be just the nominee. Well, and to the Democratic Party's, I mean, honestly, to its credit, 72 was such an open election. They didn't get the candidate they wanted. They got George McGovern, who was one of the people leading the commission. But I mean, he was a party insider. It's just that by 72, he was now a anti-war candidate. And because he was an anti-war candidate, he got a lot of votes because the war had been raging for year after year, and so many Americans lost their lives. It was so traumatic, and so many Americans opposed what America was doing to the Vietnamese people through the war. So it was just a traumatic thing. Humphrey was a pro-war candidate, and the Democratic Party leadership was pro-war. That's why he was their favorite in 1968, and why they were upset that he lost to McGovern in 72. But that's what it was. Even in 76, it was a democratic process. Jimmy Carter rises Jimmy Carter came out of nowhere. He came out of the peanut plantations. Okay, so he was not expected to be the Democratic Party leader's choice, and he wasn't as such. He wins though in 76 because of the other trauma that took place in 72, which was Richard Nixon having to resign in disgrace. In the 1980 election, that also a fair and open democratic process. It was the last election where the Democratic Party allowed primaries to be the primary way, if you will, of choosing the candidate. Because of Ted Kennedy's run for the nomination against the incumbent, Jimmy Carter, they blamed that division, if you will, in the party. They said that you haven't made the party stronger by fighting it. This Democratic thing is great, but we really need to have some grown-ups, if you will, involved. And I didn't use that word out of nowhere. There's, again, this wonderful interview of George McGovern that Amy Goodman did on Democracy Now! Cannot tell you enough to watch Democracy Now! As a news source. Make it a staple of your news diet because it's independent media. It's honest. It's fact-checked. They're not bought and paid for by anybody. So you really should get your news from there. But anyway, in 2008, Amy Goodman did this phenomenal interview of George McGovern and Jim Hightower that I mentioned also. In it, McGovern explains that he agreed to a compromise requested by the Democratic Party leadership that there should be superdelegates added to the mix. And that began in 1984. A superdelegate, as George McGovern put it, was this, these people who really should be part of the process. This is McGovern's, I'm paraphrasing McGovern to a little bit, but this is what he basically said was, these are people who were party regulars. They had the benefit of years of experience in the party, of service. He pointed out that Tip O'Neill, who would eventually become Speaker of the House of Representatives, lost a delegate position because he didn't win that delegate position. So how do you exclude somebody like Tip O'Neill, in Senator McGovern's own words? How do you exclude Tip O'Neill or party leaders of that stature from being delegates, from having a vote? And that's what superdelegates were meant to fix, quote unquote, fix. Okay. So with that in mind, I want to look now at a slide. Superdelegates began in 1984. And what this chart shows you, this is a chart that was not easy to make. In order to make this chart, you see the Democratic Party the leadership wanted there to be roughly 1/5, could be less than 1/5, but roughly 1/5 of the voters at the convention, the people voting on the nomination. They wanted 1/5 of those people to be superdelegates. Superdelegates are people who hold particular offices across the country. The governors of the states all get in automatically. The congressmen all get in. The senators all get in. They allowed these elected officials to all get in as superdelegates. So that increases the number of people. And what I did in this chart was these are based on available information. So it's not perfect by any means, but I counted up all the people known to have voted in the primaries, of the Democratic primaries only, mind you. All the people known to have voted in the Democratic primaries. All the people known to have caucused. That's a smaller number. It's a much smaller number. So you take all the people who voted, because remember, this is America, one person, one vote, right? Okay, so you take all the people who voted, okay? You take all the people who voted in the primaries, and you take all the caucuses, right? And now you choose a delegate, from the caucus and from the primaries. So basically, in 1984, the vote of any superdelegate was like the vote of 6 million people. Why do I say that? Because that's how many people it took to elect a regular delegate. There are superdelegates and there are regular delegates. Okay, when the regular delegates are what they call the term is evading me right now, but I think it was dedicated and undedicated, or designated or undesignated. I don't remember the exact term, but there's super delegates and regular delegates. Regular delegates, for our purposes, are the people chosen by primaries and by caucuses. So you take how many of those there are. There's a few thousand. The number is not static from year to year. You take that number and you say how many people got to vote in either primary or caucus. And again, caucuses, technically that's kind of skewed as well, but so it's even more people in a sense. But it took 6 million people to choose one vote, one person who gets to vote either through a caucus or through a primary. It took 6 million people to choose one vote at the convention. And so the superdelegate equaled that. Just this one person, just by virtue of the office they held, their vote at the convention counted as if they represented 6 million people. Right? That's in 1984. You can see the number change, and the stick figure gets smaller, and it's at its smallest in 2012. In 2012, so few people voted in the primaries. So few people voted in the primaries, and so few people participated in the caucus that the superdelegate now had the power of less than 2 million people. Because so few people voted. So they're the equivalent of that. And that should make you wonder something else. I mean, we are talking about one of two choices, remember? We've been told that it's enough. Just live with it. Live with the idea of having only two candidates, one chosen by the Democrats and one chosen by the Republicans. And I'm telling you, they don't even get that many people to go and vote. They don't. Let's look at how many people they get to go and vote. And let's look at that percentage. Okay. This chart goes before 1984. 1984 is that first year of superdelegates. We've had them ever since. So this is a superdelegate chart. So here we go to, let's go back to 68 again, all the way from 68 to 2024. Okay. This is the percentage of the total population of the United States that, I didn't have it. I didn't say half the people are Democrats and half the people are Republicans. I'm not doing that. Remember, we need two choices. We need a Democrat and we need a Republican. Out of all the people in the country, what percentage actually chose the Democratic nominee? That's all the people who participated in the primaries and all the people who participated in the caucuses. In 1968, it was under 4% of the US population at the time. So under 4% of the population chose, right? Who are nominee, who they just participated in the process. Again, they're participating in the process. They chose delegates. That's actually, it would be more accurate to say that they chose delegates, because those delegates had to go up into the convention in 68. The power of these delegates who were voting, who were chosen by primaries, was nullified because the party chose Hubert Humphrey. Okay. But again, tumult, and the Democratic Party response was fantastic. It was really great. It was the McGovern Commission, and they did something amazing, which was empower voters, at least the voters who chose to come to Democratic primaries. So you see that Democratic primaries actually there are more people participating now. Because one, there's more primaries, right? There had been more caucuses than there were in 1968. The number of primaries was not as many as in 1972 and thereafter. So now in 72 and 76, in 80, look, this percentage. And then something interesting happens. In 1984, this is the second Reagan term, an amazing number of people, the highest percentage of Americans voted in the Democratic voted to help choose those Democratic delegates. That's the right way to put it. And so they're participating in the process of choosing the Democratic nominee, and it still doesn't get more than 16%. Think about that. 16%. All of this, we're out of time, but I want to tell you something. This is representative democracy still, as far as choosing our candidate. Okay, and I'm saying that on purpose. Come back for episode 6, and we'll talk about that. We'll see just how happy you are with this process.